You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining us once again, Kevin Durso. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's been a busy week. A lot of stuff going on.
It's been a busy week. You had a couple of Flyers games. We'll talk about those in a minute. There was some off-ice stuff. We'll talk about that too. Some contract extensions. It's been a busy week.
Right. So like off-ice stuff that is good, off-ice stuff that is not so good. There was an alumni game thrown in there, which was fun. So we'll talk about all that stuff. But
absolutely,
but there was a lot going on. Yeah. I mean, it was like we'll get into later because obviously the break is here as we get to the current team where everything's going. The break couldn't come at a better time for I think everybody. And I'm not like we'll get to the team obviously, but like
it's a great time to have a week off.
Right. Everybody that I know of that's working around this couldn't wait for the week to be over so that we could just sit there and say there's a week off.
Totally. And as we're diving into it here, follow us on social media. We're at YWT Podcast pretty much everywhere. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso. Find us everywhere you find your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Okay, so diving right into it, there was a game Tuesday. We'll talk about that later. The big story kind of happened early Tuesday where it comes out that Sam Ersson is starting because Carter Hart has taken an indefinite leave of absence.
Well, that's not how it started.
Okay.
Because Sam Ersson was just starting.
Oh, he was?
Well, that was in the morning. So in the morning, John Tortorella had his usual pregame media. They had a morning skate. Tortorella tells everybody Ersson's the one who's starting. It was going to be back-to-back starts for Ersson, and Ersson had come in on Saturday against Colorado in the third period too. So he came in for the third period, started Sunday, was now going to start Tuesday. So there was a question asked about, you've kind of had this rotation going. What, is there any specific reason behind, whatever? And all that Tortorella said at that given moment, because nothing was actually out there yet, was we want another look at Sam. That's what we're doing here, which to be honest, really wasn't anything significant, to be honest, because of the fact that, let's do this way. And I've talked about this on the weeks prior. There was a lot of discussion that every time a soft goal would go in for one guy, because he wasn't the shiny new toy like Sam Ersson was, you kept getting, why don't they start Ersson more? Ersson should be the number one guy. Why, put him in. So there really wasn't any reason to look at it like anything. There was probably people who were just looking, going, well, he's played better. That's why he gets to start.
And for the most part, he's played well and earned that.
Right. He's played better. Yeah. So maybe that's just the reason he gets to start. They wanted to give him another chance. He had given up 4 goals against Ottawa that weren't completely his fault either.
Ooh, man, that was a tough one.
Right. So
a couple weird bounces.
Right. So just want another look. Okay, fine. So the news that we're referring to with Carter Hart came out at about 4:00 on Tuesday, 3 hours prior to the game. And the reason why I know that so specifically off the top of my head is because I'm not even kidding when I tell you this. I practically had 1 foot out the door to go to the game. And I saw the news and basically had to make a decision right then and there. I can get in the car and start driving and write this up when I get there, which is going to be at least an hour later, where I turn around and I do this now quickly because ultimately there's not much of a story there, like to put it up there. You're showing that the statement was made, that there's a release about him taking a leave of absence, and you give a couple pieces of information about what he's done to this point this season and mention that this is developing. That's about all you can say. There's not a lot of factual information that you can write into a story like that. So I turned around and I wrote the story really quickly. Probably still delayed me about 20 minutes or so before I got on the road to actually get there. But then, and I got there, and then the rest of the night was there's a game going on. That was about it, and obviously he wasn't there and Cal Peterson was, and that was the way it was going to be. Simple as that. I guess to get into this, and I got it. I'm going to say right off the top, all we can say is what we know.
Correct.
So any speculation is reckless, but I do understand if there are people who are going to connect the dots based on what we know as factual to this point.
Right.
So that's exactly how I'm going to present this. And it has to be done, to me anyway, it has to be done a little out of chronological order. but you'll get the picture the best way if I do it this way. So
Okay.
I really want to start with on Wednesday morning. There's a report out from the Globe and Mail that states that 5 players on the 2018 Canadian World Junior team are being told to surrender to London police on pending sexual assault charges.
Right.
We go backwards. Less than 24 hours before that report is out, that's when the release of Carter Hart taking and being granted an indefinite leave of absence by the Flyers. That's when that's out.
Right.
2 days prior to that, which was last Sunday, Dylan Dubé of the Calgary Flames was granted a leave of absence.
Who was also a member of that team.
Well, I was going to get there. Yeah. In the hours that immediately followed the report being out, it was announced that Alex Formenton took a leave of absence from his Swiss League team to return to Canada.
Yep.
And Michael McLeod and Cal Foote of the New Jersey Devils were also granted a leave of absence. That's 5 players who were all teammates on that 2018 World Junior team, all taking a leave of absence within 72 hours. And later on Wednesday afternoon, the London Police Department announced that they anticipate having a press conference on February 5th in regards to the public interest surrounding this investigation. Do with that what you will. Again, it's reckless to speculate, but there's a lot of dots that can be connected from just those facts.
One thing I did want to mention here is the Dylan Dubé release in particular.
Yeah, I already know, and I almost said this in the thing, but I know where you're going to go.
Mentioned that this leave was for his mental health. And now I am not speculating. And if that is the case, then I wish Dylan Dubé the best in his whatever he is doing to rectify the problem. But if it comes out that he is a part of this, and assuming the Calgary Flames knew that, then using his mental health as a shield for this is deplorable. It is uncomfortable. It is not a good look. I just wanted to put that out there.
Well,
please continue.
Well, there's another reason for that, by the way, because it's especially wrong to cite that as your reasoning in this if it turns out to be what people are connecting the dots for it to be. When there's a player on that very team that hadn't played in 20 months, and I think it was from what I understand, it was related to that also, like in terms of related to that player's mental health.
Right. Sure.
That's what's really kind of despicable about that designation is that Oliver Shillington just came back.
Well, and that's
just came back. 20
and that's why nobody batted an eye at it when he was the first statement issued. So you're not necessarily connecting any sort of dots, even in speculation form, and we're still not. That's fine,
right? Well, but you know what? You did know
because no, I'm saying the fans, us as the fans, did not know because this organization has done it in the past. They have shown that they've been willing to let players step away for their.
Well, the league in general is
right.
Now I'm not going to sit here and act like as soon as I saw whose name was attached to it and could at least connect that he was on that roster, that you didn't think something was a little up.
Okay, that's fair.
That's and I'm not I'm not trying to speculate that that's the reason. It was just one of these things where it's like,
I'll be honest with you.
Oh, that's interesting. And oh, by the way, wasn't he on that team? That was the way I looked at it.
I think the only reason I didn't do that is because they cited his mental health, and
maybe, but then that's
what I'm saying. No, that's what I'm saying. And if that turned, like I said, if that's not the case, Dylan Dubé, we wish you the best. Because
he's not the only. He's
journey.
Certainly if that turns out that was the case, he's not the only one who goes through it. In
that
fact,
entire team needs therapy.
Well, in fact, and this is something I want to watch when I get a chance to. I think it's going to be on ESPN Plus now. It was originally an Amazon Prime Canada thing, I think it was, but they have this documentary on Alexander Daigle.
Ooh.
That was called The Chosen One, and basically it was about how this guy who was the first overall pick of his draft never amounted to what people thought it was, or what he could be. And there was a lot that, from what I could see on social, there was a lot of discussion about how basically the premise or the big theme of this documentary was mental health was not talked about when he, from his draft year through the late 90s. It was not talked about 20 years ago the way that it is now. And maybe that would have changed things for a player like that who felt, where you felt like you couldn't talk about it. So certainly things have come far enough that players are able to cite mental health as a reasoning behind, I need to step away from this in some way.
Right.
That said, that's not, it's going to be a bad look if it turns out to be what everybody can connect the dots to.
Of course.
That's the thing.
And like,
so, with all that just being out there, without going any further than that into what it could mean, from a hockey standpoint, it means the Flyers are without Carter Hart for the foreseeable future.
Yep.
Bare minimum. Certainly the hockey aspect of this is not important in the grand scheme of things, but without any further factual statements that can be made besides what we've already said, that's as far as we can take this for now. And then hopefully there will be clarity soon. But really, like, that's the only other way you can also look at it, right? Like, we can list all those facts. We can say connect the dots if you want to connect the dots. And then the only other thing that you can talk about as repercussion of this right now is the Flyers don't have Carter Hart for the foreseeable future. That's it. There's nothing else that we can talk about. In fact, we're stuck now.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to get out of this.
Right now,
there's nothing else to talk about.
Right now, the biggest thing that you've got in front of you from this whole thing is a date of a potential press conference. Right. That's what you've got. Guess what that means next week. We're going to do a show next week, and we're not talking about this because there's not going to be anything new. And the only other thing that I'm going to throw out there is because I happened to, this wasn't even something I was digging for, looking for anything. I happened to have Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday, and they did the headlines in between the second and third period, I believe, with Elliot Friedman. And Friedman basically expressed that, like, yes, there's this press conference that they intend to have, but this is probably going to be a really long process of getting answers.
Right.
So kind of giving a brace yourself. This is going to take a lot of time.
It's one of those situations where we only have a couple of facts, and
the only facts you have,
and drawing any sort of lines between those facts would be done in crayon. Like, it's not
right. The only facts,
worth doing.
Right, because the only facts you have are these 5 players have stepped away from their teams. That's what you've got. And
that there's a press conference on February 5th.
Well, and again,
that's all we know.
And fact also, and this is why I said with the connect the dots thing, fact is 5 players who all happen to be teammates on the same junior team have all stepped away within 72 hours, and there's a report out. Do with that what you will.
Yep.
Because to an extent, as much as it was a report that there's 5 people and that have been asked or requested by London police to surrender.
Right.
London police didn't originally had no comment for this. And then later in the afternoon we anticipate a press conference.
Right.
Isn't that a little indirectly confirmation?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like a confirmation that the report is legit, that there's 5 people that you're looking.
It certainly
to
lends
turn
some
themselves
credibility to it.
You know what I mean? Like, just saying. So yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on this. The only other thing I will say about this is that Danny Briere happened to be speaking on Wednesday. That's another thing this week that happened that we didn't even mention off the top. That was pre-scheduled. It had nothing to do with Carter Hart specifically and the leave of absence and all that stuff.
Right.
But Briere didn't speak until 11 in the morning on Wednesday. The report by then had been out. I think literally while he was speaking, or in the time frame he was speaking, right around it was when Formenton's leave came up, and then at the very least, the leave of absence for McLeod and Foote didn't become official maybe until early afternoon with like a team release.
Right.
But there were people who cover the Devils that were already saying, hey, these 2 guys are not at practice today, and they were not at a team event the night before.
That
and it started
everybody, including
and
like
people
all the
basically were waiting
guys.
for it. Yes.
Right.
But Briere was pre-scheduled to speak, came in, and essentially made a statement right off the top about this, and could have just left it at, this is Carter Hart's personal business. We're not taking any questions or making comments at this time.
Right.
We're respecting his privacy, and left it at that. Instead, he said they were aware of the report and all questions should go to the league, and that's really all they can say about it at this time, unfortunately.
Right.
That's very different from what you could have said. if there may be nothing to it. Just saying that too.
Yeah, but again, we're not trying to draw too many conclusions here.
No, we're not. I'm just saying he could have just dismissed it and said that, Carter's privacy is important to us. We're not making any comments out of that. We're respecting his privacy.
Right.
And not acknowledged anything. The acknowledgement of the report
Well,
feeds into it a little bit.
I think he knew that if he didn't acknowledge it, he was going to be asked about it. So just getting out ahead of it.
But he could have also said, backed it up further, just again, whatever it was. The fact that he had a prepared statement on that specific issue says a lot.
Okay.
That's all.
Yeah.
And with that, I think for now, until we have more information, we get off of this topic.
Yeah, let's get into a much more pleasant topic. The fact that the Flyers have lost 5 straight. Hey. No, so
I kind of warned you this was possible.
Absolutely. And we talked on last week's show about kind of how many points you needed to get this week to stay in a comfortable playoff position. And, did you need 3? Did you need 4? Did you need 5? They got 0.
Two would have sufficed in the grand scheme of things when we look at it, right?
Absolutely. The Flyers do still remain in the 3rd playoff spot in the Metropolitan Division. But somehow would not qualify for a wild card spot. Atlantic has both wild card spots right now. So
yeah, that's one of the interesting parts is that they, and I didn't really write this part down, but they've become the lowest in point total of the playoff teams.
The Metro's struggling.
The whole there's a lot of teams out there that are struggling, and it's a valid point because I saw Charlie O'Connor tweet last night about, I get that players want the bye week, but the amount of injuries that you see, the amount of guys that look run down, the amount of teams that are struggling with those things right now kind of makes you wonder, is this all really worth it?
Right.
Basically
compressing to make up the rest of the schedule.
Well, because to make up for the rest of for the 1 week that you want off in the middle of this thing, we're going to put all these games in January. So you play 15 times before the All-Star break.
Right.
There you go. Have fun. Is it really worth it? And I add, to be honest, there's another level of this that I had context to, because all of a sudden we get to the playoffs and all of a sudden travel days and rest days are really important all of a sudden, because you don't want the quality of the playoffs to slip. Whereas the quality of the regular season is slipping, because it's not just the Flyers that are on a slide. Half of the Metro was on a slide. The LA Kings are playing terrible. You've got other teams that were kind of in a playoff spot that are now slipping a little bit. You've got teams that are playing well, obviously. I mean, what more can you say about the Edmonton Oilers and the fact that they're approaching NHL record status, or the fact that right now, every time that Nathan McKinnon or Nikita Kucherov touch the ice, you're getting MVP-like performances on a nightly basis. And that's great. I mean, even, they bounced back a little bit toward the end of this thing, but even the Rangers went through a dip, and they're leading the division.
Yep, and they're still clinging on to that division. Carolina's made their run. They've looked
fallen
better.
Off.
Yep, they've been a little up and down. They've come along a little bit recently.
Right,
yeah,
and
it's honestly a really, really, really good year for the Flyers to be here, though, because the Islanders are having a bad season, the Penguins are having a bad season, the Devils are having a bad season, the Capitals are having a bad season. We knew Columbus was going to be bad, but all these teams that we thought were going to be fighting for playoff positions. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of season left. They're only 5 or 6 points out. If the Flyers fall off a cliff here, right, you've lost 5 straight.
Right.
If you come out of the All-Star break and lose 5 more, you're definitely not making the playoffs.
Right. And I want to
put all those teams right back in.
Well, and I want to liken it to like fell off a cliff is something that was sent to me in the middle of, I forget whether it was the Boston game or the Detroit game, but either way, it was sent to me during the course of the week. And it's in the back of my mind, I wanted to sit there and go, not really, because they were in that Colorado game. They should have won the Ottawa game, and they were in the Tampa game. They're still competitive.
I agree.
Look back on 3 games earlier this month before we get to the last 2. Look back on playing Edmonton to start January, and then playing Colorado last Saturday and Tampa this Tuesday. Why'd you lose those games? Because an MVP quality player played like one and dominated.
Yep.
Straight up. You lost to Edmonton because Connor McDavid went off. You lost to Colorado because Nathan McKinnon went off. And you lost to Tampa because Nikita Kucherov went off. That's it. That's all.
And you can argue that you lost to Detroit because Alex Lyon went off.
You could argue that. And well, let's put it this way.
You got goalied a little bit.
Well, and guess what? Why'd you lose to Boston when it came down to it? You lost to Boston because one line was great.
Oh boy, for 4.5 minutes.
No, well, later in the period or later in the second
that's
too, because
fair.
they well, and technically into the third because part of that line was out there then.
No,
But
definitely.
they were in between a line change and the last goal that they scored in that one. But
How it
but 4 goals where that same line factors in one way or the other. I mean, David Pasternak's all over the place. Noted flyer killer, by the way. So you knew that was coming.
Yeah. And honestly, tell me when it's 5-2 that if they score one more, they're not back in that game. Like they're still
Well,
they
almost
scored,
did.
They scored, right, I know. And they scored the 5-2 goal with enough time left. And that's the crazy thing about this team is they have given you reason to believe, right? They scored that 5-2 goal with enough time left that you go, oh, they could do it. Absolutely. We've seen them do it before. We saw them do it against Detroit. We've seen them almost do it against other teams.
The problem in the Boston game was the fact that it really snowballed. If it was
right,
if you get out of that first period 2-0, you probably have a better shot of winning that game, obviously.
or if it's 3-1 and you get one before the end of the first.
The one problem,
that. Yeah.
the one problem that they are going to have right now is, with the exception of the Ottawa game, they have gone out against Colorado, Tampa, Detroit, and Boston and fallen behind 3-0 at some point in the game. That is recipe for failure.
Right. And again, teams like that, they're going to punish you.
Well, it doesn't even have to do with the fact that they're going to continue to punish you. It's you're now chasing, which means you're going to be spent by the time, even if you get it to a goal like they did against Tampa or like they did against Colorado, you are using so much of that energy. And they desperately needed, like as you're watching the wheels fall off at the end of what was otherwise a pretty solid first period against Boston, you're sitting there going, they need the break.
Yep.
They need this break in the worst possible way because you need to clear your head and just get away from it for a while.
You know who they get first 2 games out of the break?
I know, Florida and Winnipeg. Oh, don't we're not doing a technical looking ahead section because there's no games, but I do want to point out the fact that when they come back and you're playing
just 2 top 6 teams in the league.
I'm taking it a different direction, so just hear me out.
Yep.
You're playing Florida and then Winnipeg, which, yes, are right there at the top. You're playing Seattle, who is very much alive in the playoff race, followed by Arizona, who is very much alive in the playoff race. That needs games. They need points to get themselves into that picture. You get Toronto after that, who's right there. As a wild card team, is better than they.
That Toronto game is going to be way bigger than we thought it was going to be. Looking at that coming into the preseason for both teams.
And then you know what's next? Stadium series right away, and the Stadium series may actually be like one of the easy, like the Devils maybe not easier, but maybe one of the lighter opponents on this.
It's one of the softer matchups in the first 2 weeks
compared to what
they
play. But my point is, again, Florida, Winnipeg, Seattle battling, Arizona battling, Toronto in a wild card spot. There's a way where if you don't fix what's wrong, you're staring right down the barrel of another 10-game losing streak.
Right. Well, and yeah, absolutely.
Well, because and I'm saying this also because just going off of right now, Florida's got a player. Well, and they've got multiple, obviously. They're a talented team, but Florida's got one player in particular who's scoring at a clip unlike he ever has before. Could potentially help take over a game. If Sam Reinhart gets going, and he's done well against the Flyers in the past.
It's so wild. Sam Reinhart has 37 goals at the All-Star break. Like, what?
Now, then you go with Winnipeg. Now, Winnipeg, there's the potential to get goalied because of Connor Hellebuck, who doesn't give up a ton. And then adding the fact that Kyle Connor's back, Mark Scheifele's probably in the lineup. Totally different team than you played the first time around. They've got take over the game level players. We'll just see what happens with that. Seattle and Arizona, it's a lot more by committee. I get that. Always a chance though when, especially if you lose the first 2 coming out of the break because those teams are where they are. You're not feeling good about yourself. Always a chance you let things slip. And then, oh, by the way, you get a guy who's on pace for, I don't know what, isn't he on pace for 70?
Man, where's optimistic Kevin from 2 weeks ago?
Because I'm seeing things that are troubling.
Man, 2 weeks ago, you were ready to, buy the conference final tickets,
No, I wasn't worried about the conference final tickets, but to a degree, how far are you supposed to go with something? I think by that point we were at the halfway point, like at 41 games anyway. And you're sitting there and you're sitting there at 41 games going in the middle, or at least somewhere close to that. You're going, you can't ignore it anymore. They're halfway through the year and they're in this spot and they're still winning with regularity. And
Well,
now it stopped. You
and
hit a slide.
well, and so what I'm thinking is over the last, especially the last week, but really over the last two here, since the losing streak has started, it's not even necessarily, it's one of those things that hockey is a game that's just this close at all times. And a bounce here, a bounce there kind of swings the other direction. And I'd be interested to see what the advanced analytics say on it. And I have not done the research, so I may have to look on that. But I'd be curious to see what kind of their PDO looks like over the last 2 weeks, because it seems as though it's been a lot of weird, funky deflection goals, a lot of fluttery nonsense. Like,
well, there were a couple of games like that, yes. But look, there's a reason why in this, and this is maybe this is what's doing it to me a little bit. If you want me to go there's a reason why losing last Sunday to Ottawa after you led 3-1 felt the way it did. When those situations happen, you need points. Ottawa's at the bottom of the conference. You have a 3-1 lead. You got to finish that. Simple as that.
No, you're right.
Especially if you want to be a playoff team this year. If you can't afford to have lengthy losing streaks. And it's one thing to lose 5 straight and 2 of the games go to overtime and you get something to show for it a little bit. Like if we're talking about no 3-2 record, we're probably sitting here feeling fine about the way that the standings look, because at that point, they'll be still within, they would still be within 2 or 3 of Carolina for second. The gap between third and fourth in the division would not be 4. It would be something like 6. And you'd be feeling way more comfortable about that at the All-Star break. Okay. It's 5 regulation losses. That's the problem.
I'm gonna buoy the bandwagon a little bit here. Okay. This team did not make it through the first 40 games. 44 games by getting lucky bounces and by this, that, the other. They got there by outworking other teams. They got there by, on most nights, being the better team, working harder than other teams, playing together better than other teams did. Would you agree, generally speaking, on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
They had a bad week. They had a bad 2 weeks. Like you said, they've played 417 games since Christmas. They are a young team that might not necessarily have the legs built up for the long-term NHL season. A bunch of kids who came through the college system, etc.
Right.
Give them their week off. Go to Panama City Beach or wherever 17-year-olds go. 21-year-olds go, whatever. Let them go wherever. Let them rest up for a week. When they come back, the schedule is a tiny bit less compressed. I'm willing to give this team some runway. They have earned a little runway in the standings.
And you're getting ahead of where I have all this.
Okay.
Like, I didn't mean to come in with this like it's over.
Man, that sure sounds like it. This is it's Kevin.
Well, no, because what I'm trying to brace people for is don't be shocked if this is where it falls apart. Like there's an element where you can sit there, you look, you say it's really leaking oil right now. It's getting to a point where if this doesn't get corrected early after the break, this might be where you fall apart. And
I don't disagree with that.
Right. And it has to do with a lot of things. You already mentioned younger players who may not have played this much. It has, Sean Couturier has been trying to carry a load at top line center for the season, and he's done a really good job of it, but he hadn't played in nearly 2 years. You're now 50 games into a season. He's played in 46 of them, I believe.
Something like
good
that.
luck. Good luck if you're starting to get banged up and you don't get a lot of time. Like in January, you didn't get a lot of time between games. So that's why I'm saying the week couldn't come at a better time.
Oh yeah,
off.
I agree.
So and I'm just saying, if you don't come out on the other side playing more like the team that you were when you were winning 5 games in a row before this, then it's probably not going to end well. Just for context, they won against Dallas for their 5th in a row, which was what was now 11 days ago at this point. It was about as convincing a win as they had all season. They had a 25-14-6 record, 56 points in the standings, and they had a plus 14 goal differential 45 games into the season. So that's why I also sounded the way that I did with some of it, is because there was a growing reason to believe in this team and their ability to do this all year long, because they were doing it at this point. 45 games in, and you don't even have a third of those games being regulation losses. That was remarkable for what we expected.
Absolutely.
And while they were competitive in some of these games, you could see how this was starting to get to where we are now. It was leaking oil. And by the time they faced the Red Wings and the Bruins, they just desperately needed the break. And so just in these 5 games that they've played, their goal differential over the 5 games is -15, which brings them back to a season total of -1. The record is back to 25, 19, and 6, which really just equates to 25 wins, 25 losses.
It's literal 500, right?
Right. And as much as we can point out that they are at the All-Star break, still 3rd in the Metro, still 4 points up on a playoff spot and on 4th place, and didn't really lose that much ground. If this is how the final 32 go, and it's going to run on fumes and it's going to start to get ugly, they're not going to make the playoffs, because these other teams are going to have more consistency and have better talent that they will take care of it just by playing the Flyers themselves. Simple as that. There's like even down to they've played 50, and all these other teams, now some of them aren't that big of a deal. The Islanders only having a game in hand, not a big deal. It's a 4-point gap. They only have the opportunity to pick up 2 for the games the extra games they have to play. But the Penguins have 4. The Devils have 3. The Capitals have 3. And as much as I don't look at some of those teams and say they haven't played with consistency the way that I would expect a playoff team to either, they've got the opportunity to change that narrative quick. And you think about like a team like the Devils, to me, is the one that really stands out, because I sit there and I go,
they have the kinds of players that can turn it on.
And they don't right now. They're going out every night without Jack Hughes. As soon as Jack Hughes is back, that changes things for them. And if you're close enough, go on a little bit of a run and watch what happens. That's what I'm talking about. Right. I do want to put all of this in perspective, though, because after the way the first, and I came right out with this, I know I just did the doom and gloom thing to start this whole thing off a little bit. And part of that is because I've seen this from the fan base. Like five losses in a row will bring out some bad reactions from the fan base. I'm not saying it's the entire fan base, but I didn't even come in saying it like this. All I was trying to do was sit there and say, listen, 5 losses in a row, if you're just looking at playoffs, that hurts, and the optimism needs to go down a little bit, because it just does. The reality is, if this is what you're going to get, you're not making the playoffs. They have to get back to what they were if that's going to happen. What I want to put in perspective is that there's a lot of people that I saw that were delivering, and it may not even be directed at me. I just see stuff. There's a lot of people with the same old Flyers going around in the blame game and all that. Listen, this team is in the first year of a public rebuild.
Right.
And
they're playing with house money at this point.
And I also mentioned about these 5 losses, or at least a lot of losses in the course of the month. The one commonality during the losing streak, and whether it was Colorado, Tampa Bay, Boston, it happened against Edmonton too. Connor McDavid, Nathan McKinnon last weekend, this week with Nikita Kucherov and David Pastrnak. This just in, Hart-nominated players can play like it at any time.
Yeah.
And take over a game. And in the Flyers case, they got hit with it every single time. And I pointed this out during Tuesday's game. I tweeted this out as Kucherov went off, and I posted, they don't have a player and like this. And this is a stark reminder of it. Yep. And that got met with a few replies of yet. And I get it. They've got Matvei Mishkov in the pipeline, but Matvei Mishkov is not walking through the door tomorrow. And this is the way it's going to be when you face players like that right now. And at this moment, you don't have anything to match that. No matter how red hot Travis Konechny gets, or Owen Tippett, or Joel Farabee, no matter how hot they are at the time, you can't match that. And that's what the Flyers need to strive for in development. You've got to achieve that to really get where you want to go. Again, it's only year 1 of the rebuild. And I think that everybody should be enjoying the fact that the Flyers have an identity, and that they are playing above expectations and possibly could make the playoffs as a result of those things.
Sure.
It's 45 games in. They're in a playoff spot. It's possible. But if
And
they don't, it's not going to be the end of the world. Other
sure,
teams in this division, in the conference, in this league are much, much closer to achieving the success that the Flyers want to get to than the Flyers currently are.
yeah,
And if this thing runs out of gas because of buy-in from the entire team and playing a certain way just isn't sustainable for 82 games because you can be as invested in it as you want to and you just don't have the legs to play how they have to for an
right.
82-game season, then so be it. You can be excited about the future of the team. You can trust it. And by the way, I'll get into this later, but you can trust in the new regime to get it to where everybody wants to go. And you can
Right.
enjoy watching what you are on most nights, that, you know, which has been a competitive team, even if it doesn't go anywhere beyond the 82 game season at the, you know, this
Well,
or 82 game schedule this season. And I get it. Like at this point, we're 50 games in, there's 32 to go. So I think that part of the equation is that when you're 50 games in, even after 5 straight losses, there's 32 left. You're in a playoff spot. You want to see it finished because
absolutely.
we're this far already. Why not finish it? But you know, and anything can happen after that. Even if the odds are as long as it gets, like you make the playoffs,
Well,
anything can happen.
well, yeah. And if you make the playoffs, this roster gets real fun real quick.
Well, sure, and they then they're going to have to play the same way they did, and again, you know,
Absolutely.
and I
Think
get that.
about it. Think about it. Garnet Hathaway,
Well, everybody's geez,
Rasmus Ristolainen,
I
and
was
Nick
going to say, hasn't
Delorier.
everybody wanted to see playoff Risto for what 10 years?
Yes. I want Rasmus Ristolainen to commit felonies against people
Well, and
and
there's
get
no,
away with it because it's the
and
playoffs.
in fairness, by the way, there's no guarantees that the roster is completely the same come
Of course.
whenever April hits. But
Of
we'll
course.
get to that as it kind of comes along. I mean, you know, but and this is the point that I want to make that goes back to what you started to say, because I had said it after they lost, kind of throughout the course of they lost to Edmonton. I said it on a radio thing.
Okay.
That I get that they're, you know, I think they need the break, and I'll say what I said when they were going through a bit of a slide the last time. At any point, this could all be over, or it could level off, and they could be everything we thought they were going to be.
Yep.
But when they had the last losing streak, which was the one that kind of kicked off 2024, where they were on the West Coast,
Yeah.
I said then that the team had at least earned the opportunity to prove that this wasn't them and that they could get it back on the rails. And if they don't, then that's how it goes.
Right.
But I didn't want to write it off because of a 4-game losing streak then where they got a couple games to overtime. And I don't want to write it off because of a 5-game losing streak that
Where they're
didn't
limping
really
down the stretch to the All-Star break.
Well, not only that, but that didn't result in a whole lot of movement. If they lose 5 games in a row and everybody else got hot and they fall right out of the playoff picture, then yeah, I think I might be writing it off a little differently, because
No,
at
the
that
Flyers
point I'm
are still 4 points clear of the playoffs.
well, right. I'm
Yeah.
saying if I can look at it and point out, well, Pittsburgh is going on a run and New Jersey's right there, and the Islanders are going to go on are on a bit of a run. If things had changed with some of these other teams, then I totally feel that way. But I can't, because it's not like they were alone. You know, they weren't the only team that was going through struggles at this point. So might as well see who corrects themselves first.
Right.
And goes from there. Like at the end of the day, like this is why like the goal differential thing was really a good one. You know, like the fact that they're now -1, because go look at some of the other teams in a division. The Islanders are a -23. The Devils are now a -7, and part of that I'm sure has to do being without Jack Hughes.
Of course.
The Capitals are a -31.
Yeah,
like
I think the Capitals are just bad this year, though.
Well, like exactly. And I kind of looked at it and I'm like, I get that the standings show that all of these teams are once again kind of back to within 5 points of each other because the Flyers went on a slide now. But for a little while there, I was looking at them going, Washington's not a threat in this kind of. Not the way that I see it. And
looking across the division, I don't know if Pittsburgh is either. Just the way
Pittsburgh's going to make me curious, because Pittsburgh offensively has more than enough firepower to go on a run.
And Sid's warming up.
Right. If the goaltending falls apart there, or defensively they are a dumpster fire, which is always possible, especially because it was the way it was earlier in the year, they will fall right back out of it.
I agree.
And this is one of the things I think I said before also, in terms of, as much as the Flyers are sitting there with teams behind them that have games that they can make it up in, I'd much rather be the team that's got more completed than be the team that's sitting here going, I'm not in a playoff spot. And think about it. Like, these other teams, every one of them, the Islanders, the Penguins, the Devils, the Capitals, they all have to be able to look and know that the only way you're getting there is getting the third right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have to surpass whatever the margin is in front of you. And you're sitting there looking, going, we got to make up 5 points, 6 or 4 points, 5 points, right? And to an extent, possibly 6, depending on how tiebreakers are going to work.
Right.
And you're battling with each other, in the process.
Well, the Metro is going to be fun to watch coming down the stretch here.
Sure. But what I'm getting at is that those 4 teams, despite having extra games to play that could get you right to that spot just by winning them, there's an element of pressure that goes along with it in terms of, well, we got to win the games that we have to make up in order to get back into this thing. Otherwise, we're sitting in the same spot that we were before, and now we have less time to make it up, and they're going to keep playing too.
Well, and that's why what the Flyers did in the first half of the season was so impressive, because you did build yourself a little bit of cushion. You got 4 points. You don't need to play perfect hockey. Obviously you have a little bit of wiggle room. You want to win as many games as you can, but if this team comes out of the All-Star break and looks anything like the team from 3 weeks ago, I think we're okay.
Sure, possibly, and that's remains to be seen. I'm going to tell you what's going to get fascinating really quick, because February's not this loaded. You already kind of alluded to it. It's not this loaded down month in terms of games, and they still don't play anybody within the division until the Stadium Series.
Yep.
And I'm just curious that once that point hits, because you're going to wipe another 5 games off the schedule before then. So you're now going to be through 55 with 27 remaining. And out of the 27, they have 3 games in February that are divisional. Yep. I go to March, and I'm trying to count on the fly, so give me a moment.
Washington, Carolina.
I believe 3 more there as well, because Washington, Carolina, New York. And then go to April, and it's Islanders, Columbus, even though they're going to be out of it by then.
Rangers, Devils, Caps to close it out.
All of a sudden,
and if the Devils and Caps are anywhere in it, then those games are going to be absolute dogs.
I mean, I even lumped the Islander game at the beginning of April into that too, because they're right there with it too. All of a sudden, you're going to play the division a lot. Like we said, it's 3 only 6 games between now and the end of March, and then all of a sudden you're going to get to April, and it's
4 or 5 out of 7.
It's 5 out of 7.
Yep.
But even then, 5 with 6 more. We just mentioned by the time the Stadium Series hits, you only have 27 left. So 11 of those games out of the 27 are divisional.
Yep. They're important games.
I mean, even down to, let's put it this way, before, you can also include in there that over the course of February, they're going to play Toronto. They're going to play Toronto for the first time. They're going to play Tampa again. They play Florida. Florida's going to be in there twice, or once in February. They go to March. They play Florida 2 more times. They play Tampa the last time, Toronto 2 more times. These teams that are hovering around the wild card is where I'm getting at with that.
Yeah.
I get it. Detroit's in there too, and they just closed the season series with Detroit. But you got a lot of games against teams that are hovering around that spot too, where it's those matter. That was why, and it was why I wouldn't, it wouldn't have shocked me going into the week if Boston was a loss.
Right.
Boston's really good. The Tampa and Detroit games were ones that really mattered, because you're talking about 2 teams that were right on your level going in. In fact, like we said, they're below every team in the Eastern Conference in the playoffs right now, point-wise, because that's the way it shook out. And now league-wide, we were talking about this team a week ago, even despite the 2 losses that they had, still being top 10.
Yeah.
Now you're 14th.
Yeah, you've slipped a little bit, obviously.
You've slipped to middle of the pack again.
When you go a week and a half without getting any points, it's kind of what happens in today's NHL.
And this is kind of the crazy thing, is because, and I'm not trying to play doom and gloom, but if it were to continue in the opposite direction, you're in the playoff spot, you go back to your winning ways, you're pushing to make the playoffs. That's the upside.
Oh yeah.
The other side of it is that 6 points the other way, if you continue to not get points, because that's how these games are going.
Time to trade Nick Seeler.
Well, it's not about who they trade and what they do at the deadline. I'm talking about everybody who looked at what their draft position was going to be. It's not like if they don't fall out of this thing that they're just going to end up being the 15th or 16th in the lottery.
Right.
There's a way for them to fall back into the 20s and be right around 10th.
Yeah.
And suddenly be back in play for a top 10 pick, because there's that many teams that are close enough.
Things are lumped pretty tight. So if you're going to be bad,
the gap,
if you decide to pull the shoot
right,
hard,
Sure. Like, do you know what they're going to be facing? Honestly, and Washington last year had foresight on this to start to be sellers at the deadline, despite the fact that they were right there in the playoff race. They had foresight on this. That's where you hope Danny Briere's mind is in terms of, and I'm not saying get rid of everybody. Obviously, they made a couple of decisions. One was obvious. The other one was, I'm not calling it questionable, like in terms of why you do it. It's questionable in terms of we didn't know what this guy's future was going to be as we get into it. And there's other guys that you face the same decision with on, defensively. There's two guys that you have as pending UFAs. What do you do about them? What do you do about,
and the fact that you have at least one extra defenseman on your roster at the moment as it is.
Sure. Until something clears itself up. And well, and in fairness, by the way, that was, if you want to point at why things started to fall apart and players that need the break individually, just in the Boston game alone, Travis Konechny and Joel Farabee were both -4 as forwards. And that's strictly, and why? Because that's strictly because you were tasked with, you're the top line, defend David Pastrnak, and you couldn't. The defensive pairing of Travis Sanheim and Jamie Drysdale, and I told you last Saturday, like on last show, that last Saturday, Sanheim was the worst player on the ice because he didn't because he didn't look like he knew what side to be on with 7, and it was weird. And he looked like obviously you're tasking him with covering McKinnon. Right. Good luck with that when McKinnon's the way he is. So guess who goes -4 again, against the Bruins. And Drysdale did too, by the way. So Drysdale doesn't come out of this scot-free either. Like, no. He's had a rough go, and I get that his situation since the trade is not perfect. He was sick for a while. Apparently he still wasn't completely feeling himself, and he's sleeping on a couch because he hasn't gotten to bed yet.
I was going to say, I assume he's going to be spending this week like getting his house together, and
he's got a place to live, and he needs to get his bed. Well, no, he needs to get his bed.
Wow, that's fair.
Because that's what he didn't have. He's been sleeping on a couch, so.
Oh, listen, as somebody who's in the furniture industry, I get it. Things take time.
Sure. Well, and it wasn't like it was a small move by any stretch. You're going from Anaheim to Philly.
Right.
That's not it's not a short trip, and sure takes some time to get your stuff out from Anaheim. But anyway, that's all I'm saying is you're gonna have to make those decisions, and they're gonna be, let's face it, we were coming on the show after 5-game winning streak and talking about how they were within 2 points of the division lead, and that kind of also it's why there's an element where I'm like, and maybe this is why not why I'm doing I'm not doom and gloom about it, but it's like there's an element where I'm glad they're going through this.
Yeah.
Because it's a reminder of what they really are at this moment. Like if they surge to the top and next thing you know, they're taking the division lead in a year where everybody said rebuild, what the hell does that tell you?
Well, and even if, okay, but what if they come out of the break and win,
6 in a row?
Right. 4 of 6, even 4 of 5.
Right.
All of a sudden you're going, oh, they might be a big boy team. They might be like a real, they might be ready to go.
Well, sometimes it's not. And listen, sometimes it's not, because I go back to that Ottawa game, for example, because it's a different story if you lose to Colorado, win against Ottawa, and then it's like, oh yeah, you lost 3 games. I'm not trying to go backwards to something, and I'm not trying to make a direct comparison, but hear me out a little bit from a locker room standpoint.
Okay.
They find it, you assume anyway, that they find out about the Carter Hart thing roughly, even if it's just in the days that, like the day before or even Sunday, that they might know something. But Carter Hart was there on Sunday to back up and wasn't on Tuesday. And the release comes out 3 hours before the game. And it means that whether they have answers to give or not, they're going to get asked a little bit about it, at least in the immediate. And then you're going to get just so that everybody who does what I'm doing can get the statement of I'm not making a comment or whatever, just so you because obviously they
record that you asked
and they were buttoned up about it, and you expect them to be. But what I'm trying to liken it to, and again, it's the situations are vastly different, so I get it. But do you remember when the Flyers were playing pretty well to start the 2019-20 season, and then Oscar Lindblom found out he had cancer?
Yeah,
and the road trip went, and the road trip went well. Not the whole season, but the road trip they were on was terrible.
Yeah,
because how do you go out and play when something that changes
when a
your
teammate gets
world
pulled out of your locker room,
whether it's for good or like obviously like I'm like, because you can rally around Lindblom and we're fighting for this guy because he's fighting for his life. We're fighting for him.
And they ended up.
It may not be the same way with Carter Hart, obviously, but my point is that in the immediate, when something shakes up your room and changes it, at the core, one way or the other, positive or like negative news, that whether you can use it as a positive to inspire or whether it's just a straight up negative, it's hard to go out and play and be at your best for a little while. Like, that's part of what the break helps too, that you can kind of move on and try to figure out a way to figure out how you go on with your season without the guy in the room, and because circumstances are circumstances.
Right. It's a physical break. It's a mental break. Honestly, it probably comes at a decent time because you get to everybody gets to go for a couple of days, and then when you gather together, it's the new group.
Well, because you could have honestly reversed the two results from from where I'm talking about to the end of the week. You could have told me that the Tampa game was 6-2 and they gave up 4 goals in the blink of an eye, and they were more competitive against Boston, and I would have told you that's the result of, hey, by the way, this news just came out, and that's where our heads are at today.
Entirely.
Versus, because that's all I'm saying is that bad news does something to, like, they're human.
Of course.
Whether the negative news has serious implications attached to it or not, it still is going to, from a human level, hit you a certain way. This is somebody like
especially when we're talking about professional athletes who are in the top 0.1% of their sport. Like, any sort of slip can be a major decrease in performance.
Right. And like, listen, think about it for a second too, as we were connecting the dots with that. If you're a member of the team and you start to realize that, like, hey, all that stuff that I heard is true or could be true, and there's at least more gravity to the situation.
Right. There's something going on.
Now you're sitting there going, this is a guy who I go to battle with every night. I'm friends with. We do, on the road, it's team
we go to dinner together. Stuff, right.
Like Cam York spoke after the Tuesday game against Tampa. He was his roommate.
Okay. I was about to ask if we knew who his roommate was. Typically.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And it's like, how do you so that changes your world.
Sure.
Like, that's a guy you room with. It's somebody you stay with over the course of road trips. Like, it's going to hit you from a human level. So that's, which is another reason why, like, I guess to go back to what I was really saying was, with perspective, give them a chance to see if this is who they are at the stage of it or not, because that's another element that, from a human standpoint, their world got rocked this week.
Yeah, entirely. And
so figure it out. And this is why I'm saying also, like, in general, it's January as a whole was a month, and this has less severity, or the first thing had less severity than this. Like, Carter Hart's news shakes up your room way more than the idea that you had to go out and trade a player that most of them didn't know for a guy who comes into the room. Like it's kind of like, to an extent, it's easy to brush off, hey, Cutter Gauthier didn't want to be a flyer, and everybody gets in front of a microphone and goes, well, I never really met him, so, like, if he doesn't want to be here, I guess that's his choice, but we're gonna go forward.
Jamie's pretty cool.
Right. Well, and apparently a few of the guys already knew him coming in too, which was another angle of it. Like,
that's always
you're bringing a guy like Jamie Drysdale in, and it's like, hey, I train with him. I used to, all that type of stuff. Like, yeah, that changes things up a little bit, know. And so while we're trying to put it all in perspective, oh, by the way, like, January's also been busy because there was more news on the positive side that dropped this week. So it's real, but like, and we're getting to that in a second, but like, my point is, it's really been a month. And I think everybody, as we said, and as I said, everybody, I think, could really use the break, use a reset, come back ready to go for the final 32, and we'll see what happens.
And that's why I'm willing to give this team the benefit of the doubt.
Sure.
Because, like, I
was willing to do it when they were losing, like, had a losing streak the first time around. They hadn't lost 4 games in a row all season.
Right.
Going into January. Then they do. And at least it was cushioned by 2 of those games got to overtime. You got a little something for it. 0-2-2 before you win another game is not bad.
Right.
in the great, especially when it didn't cost you that much.
And then you looked pretty dominant for a little stretch there.
Well, and then because then you won a game, you lost the game on the day that all this other chaos was going on with the Gauthier trade, and then you won. Then you ripped off 5 in a row, which really, when you equate it with the other game that's involved, you go, that's 6 out of 7. You're back.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it slipped away, and that's why I'm saying, like, even if they go into the All-Star break on a 3-game losing streak because they won against Ottawa, you can still even take it and go, despite the loss to Colorado, you won 5 games in between the 2 losses. You had another win against Calgary, another win against Ottawa. All right, you won 7-9 before 3 straight. Even that sounds better.
Yes.
And let's also not forget about the fact that the 4th loss of that earlier 4-game losing streak, I've said before, you self-sabotage yourself with your lineup that night against Columbus. You should have won that game.
Yeah.
You should have won that game by having a better lineup, and then you let it 2-0, and you still let it get away from you. Like, those 2 games, and the fact that you only got 1 point instead of 4 when you could have gotten 4, we're having a different conversation.
Right.
Seriously, it's a totally different conversation if we're sitting there going, over the course of the last month, they lost 6 games in regulation, and it was Connor McDavid, Nikita Kucherov, Nathan McKinnon, David Pastrnak, and 2 other games where you just didn't quite have it.
Right. Well, and even if it's just the 2 games that you win, right? The Ottawa game and the other one, 4 extra points still put you 1 behind Carolina for second.
Well, I'm giving them 3 because it's 3 because they got a point against Columbus, and I'm changing that to they should have won that one.
So even if you had 3 more points, you're at 59. The Islanders are at 52. A 7-point playoff gap is a little bit safer than the current 4.
Sure.
Like if we're sitting here at the All-Star break saying, hey, the Flyers are 7 points clear of the playoffs.
Well, and generally speaking, too, like to lose, if they would have lost 3 in a row down the stretch going to the break, and you're sitting there going, it's the first time you've seen Tampa with all of their firepower, first time you've seen Boston, who's definitely on a roll and is having another one of those types of seasons. I think you just shrug it off, and just like the second Colorado game, you go, if you get burned by a super talented, Hart-nominated type player, you get burned by a Hart nominee, right? Like
they're top 10 players in the world for a reason,
right? And if you can come back with otherwise, that the only other games you lost were again because let's keep everything else the same. That they go into Detroit and they don't have Owen Tippett as part of the lineup, and the Carter Hart news is still what it is, and things like that. That maybe okay. So Erisson's getting more starts, so maybe he's wearing down a little bit before the break, and that's why and he didn't even look bad in that game. Like 2 of those goals were as fluky as it gets.
Totally.
Totally. The bounces just go against you, kind of thing. Then you sit there and you shrug that one off too, or like we said with the game against Pittsburgh, where it's like there's a whole lot of other stuff going on outside of the game itself, to the point where the game didn't even matter. So most people don't even remember that how many people probably even remember that they lost to Pittsburgh earlier in the month, because
very few,
because that specific game was overshadowed with, oh, by the way, Cutter Gauthier was traded.
Yeah, and by the way, as far as Sam Erisson's workload goes, you don't have a back-to-back coming out of the break until February 24th, 25th. So you do have like a couple of weeks there where he can probably start every game.
I wonder if they still try to squeeze a game in there out of Cal Peterson somewhere.
It depends on how precious the points are. Like if you win your first 3, I could see Cal Peterson playing against Arizona, maybe.
I kind of see him playing against Seattle potentially.
Okay. I don't disagree with that. But if you lose the first 2, if you lose against Florida and Winnipeg, I think you have to play Sam Ersson to try to get some points.
Sure. Well, it's going to be Erisson to come out of the break. It's going to be Erisson against Florida and Erisson against Winnipeg.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But I think if they lose both of those games, he has to play against Seattle too.
Probably. I mean, well, guess what? At that point, he might be playing all of them.
That's what I mean. Until But okay. You mentioned a player a minute ago who did not play the other night.
Sure.
But he will be playing in Philadelphia Flyers orange for a very long time.
Yeah.
The Flyers announced some contract extensions this week, and
on the same day, or close to, or at least the reports came out on the same day.
And
Danny Briere was one busy guy on Friday.
Yeah, and we'll mention the smaller one a little bit later, but the big news here, the big top dog story, Owen Tippett is going to be a Philadelphia Flyer, well, at least theoretically, for another 8 years after the end of this season.
Right.
He will be making a hefty $6.2 million per year. It's just about $49 million over the length of the contract. Kevin, what do you think?
I'm very surprised that they got this deal under $7 million.
I agree.
Just given how the numbers look, given Tippett's potential. Danny Briere, when he spoke about this on Friday night, joked that yes, the hot streak over the last week probably got him a few extra dollars out of this deal.
It was 5.9 a couple days ago.
Here, because it's a very team friendly deal over the course of everything.
Oh yeah, 8 year. This
actually
kind of term.
Funny enough. So I'll even share a story, and I'm not trying to jump into some things, but this was pretty funny because I was just as an aside here, I was talking to after because this all came out. They were doing the morning skate for the alumni game that night. So we're in the locker room afterwards or whatever, and I was over talking to Chris Terrian, who obviously is part of the Snow to Goalie podcast.
Right.
And Bill Meltzer was also with me at that time, and Bundy sits there and says something about, so Tippett, huh, or whatever, and we told him what the reported terms were, and his eyes nearly shot out of his head when we said 6.2 million, because he couldn't believe that value.
That's very low. Okay,
right, like as in like that's it.
I agree.
So
here's what
it's an incredibly team friendly deal. Obviously, it is still a bet, but it's a team friendly deal. I'll let you go.
Yeah, here's what I said in the group chat. Essentially, if this is kind of the start of the next phase of Owen Tippett's career, where he does this consistently every year, or even exceeds this moving forward, then I think this contract is a great deal that ages incredibly well as as the salary cap goes up. If this is a flash in the pan and he kind of settles somewhere in this range, and this is maybe the tippy top of that range, then it's a manageable deal that is okay and ages into being fine.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I'm trying to liken it to other contracts on the team, because obviously I think if it reaches its full potential, it's and it's funny because we literally started to have this conversation last week because we were talking about Tippett a lot, that what's the next contract going to look like. And I don't think, the question was the years more than anything, I think.
Yeah.
But ultimately that it was going to have to match up. And that's why I said, I kept going off of Farabee got 5x5. And when Konechny had re-upped all those years ago, he was 6 and it was 6.25, I believe is what it is.
Right.
Or no, I'm sorry. It's less than that. It's 5.75, I think.
Something like that. Yeah.
Actually. But that was 5 years ago.
Right.
That Konechny was signing that deal. So obviously things changed with the cap then, and it would be worth more now. And that's where you started to equate the number for Tippett was going to be, if Konechny got 6 years and right in between 5.5, 6 million, like that, then you were figuring that Tippett was going to start to teeter towards, it's going to be at least 6. It's got, it's probably got the potential to hit 7 because the cap has changed. 6.2 is, we kept going up as the years went up too, by the way. Like it was, if it's 7, like if it's 7 years, it's going to be 7 mil easy, because he's going to want more as the contract goes.
Right. You're buying UFA years.
Right. So it's an incredibly team friendly deal. And I kind of liken what you're talking about to, like on the lower end scale to what Cam Atkinson has become. Because Cam Atkinson's making near $6 million, and you're getting like the streaky goal scorer who can give you like 20, but it's going to happen over the course of like 2 big hot streaks, not consistently over the year. And Tippett's definitely streaky in his own right, but you get what I'm saying. Like,
sure.
Weird, but it's also got the potential to age just like the Konechny or Farabee deals could.
A weird fact about this contract, by the way, I don't know if you've looked at it on Cap Friendly.
I did have Cap Friendly up at one point. I'll go back to it just to.
There's a modified no trade clause.
I do know that there is
for the middle 4 years of the contract. It's an 8-year deal. The first 2 years, there's no trade clause. Then years 3 through 6, there are. Years 7 and 8, there is no trade protection at all.
You know what that is, right?
I mean, that's the team protecting themselves, and hey, we
Oh,
can move you if we need
I hear it's a
to.
team protecting themselves. You know how often you hear something like that, though? That it's not just, hey, this kicks in 2 years and then it's for the rest of the contract.
I feel like most of the time it is for the rest of the
Right,
contract.
that's what I'm saying. So you know what this
Yeah.
is, right?
Okay, what is that?
That's Danny Briere playing 3D chess instead of checkers.
Okay.
Like every other GM in the league is handing out, okay, you want a no move? Here's a no move. And it's
So
just the duration of the contract.
You're saying he's already looking at his cap situation in 2030, 31, which is the first
He's
season
definitely
on the
thinking
back
about the
end with no
future.
trade protection.
Well, I asked him this on Friday in terms of,
and I don't think you're wrong, by the way. Like, there's certainly a chance he could be.
So last offseason, they signed Sam Ersson before his contract. We talked about this. They got ahead of Sam Ersson.
Right.
That he's already under contract for 2 more years beyond this season. It's done. They don't even have to deal with it.
Yep.
And you go out there and you sit there and you go, this was Tippett's contract year, but it's done now in January, not in May or June. And we'll get to Ryan Poehling as well. And that wasn't finalized at the time, but it was, again, it was a 1-year deal. And before we get to June, it's done.
Yep.
So I kind of asked, is there an emphasis on getting ahead of some of these things when, like, with whatever? And, he kind of downplayed that a little bit in terms of, like, both sides have to be willing. Like, there's agents that wait for that opportunity or whatever. And, like, I get where he was going, because, like, what he's trying to get at is that, like, look, at the time, Tippett's on a hot streak. Yes, they were working on this before then, obviously, but Tippett was on a hot streak. Who's to say that they couldn't have backed down and said, we'll wait until the end of the year. Let's see when he crosses.
Cools off
right. Well, or when we'll wait until he cools off. It's when he crosses 30, or if he's pushing 35 at the end of the year, then let's talk. Because if he's at 35 at the end of this year, then he's probably going to have 40 potential. And if he does, I want him to be paid like 40 potential.
Yeah,
it changes the game. So yes, both sides need to be willing.
I think there's a real chance that this is one of those deals where 3 or 4 years into it, you go, man, how'd they sign that?
Well, by the way, also, and this is completely out of the blue, kind of, because it's not a player we're talking about, but this is something interesting. Did you see that there was a report out about how potentially Morgan Frost is still in play in trade talks?
Huh. I can't see how that's possible, but I understand. Like,
well, just hear me out, because something that Danny Briere said is going to just trigger a thought here.
Okay.
Because it had to do with the answer I'm talking about to the question I asked. Because Briere kind of talked about how, like, it goes both ways. Like, the player and the agent have to be willing to also negotiate to get these things done ahead of time, like that or whatever.
Certainly.
And then he said something along the lines of, there are some players we wanted to extend that the player and the agent are not willing to at that time.
Oh, interesting.
And you know what's interesting? Or I'm sorry, he mentioned wanting to do long-term deals with players, and sometimes it doesn't work out that way because they're not willing to at that time.
Sure.
And I can't help but think about how Morgan Frost was one of the last players signed last offseason. Very late, very close to training camp. Very much like we're trying to get something done and we're going to have to settle on something rather than get done what we want to get done.
Right.
I'm starting to think again, and it's a connecting the dots kind of thing. So I'm starting to think there's a possibility that they wanted to negotiate longer term with Morgan Frost and instead got the 2-year deal that ultimately came out.
Okay. I think that makes a lot of sense.
And that is also why there is a lot in play about his future still, because
if you can't secure a player long term, if he is determined to exercise his rights, don't get me wrong, I'm not, but if he is determined to maybe go test the free agency market or whatever the situation may be, get paid what he's worth, totally. But if at a certain point, if you as a general manager, if you have control over a player and you cannot exercise it, then you gotta trade him while you can.
But exactly. And my point with that was just kind of how it just sounded like there's more than Tippett. There's guys on the team that they feel like they know are going to be long-term pieces. And look, maybe that's why Briere looks back on it and is part, like, he's not the GM at the time, but maybe, I'm sure he's signing off on, let's keep Travis Sanheim for 8 more years and do that at the beginning of last season.
Oh yeah.
It's the 8 years there. It's the Sean Couturier extension that didn't kick in until last year, I believe.
Right.
It's stuff like that, getting ahead of a few guys that are fits, and or at least that you feel strongly about that are fits.
Yeah. And this is something that we've kind of talked about is going through the rebuild process. At a certain point, they'll start nailing guys down long term. And we saw the first one. Like this, we talked about Sanheim, being a move that Danny Briere probably would have at least known about, and, generally agreed with. And even going back to Couturier, but like this is the first one in the Danny Briere era that has his name on the masthead. And this is the first tent pole, like, okay, this is a flyer. This guy is a flyer.
And like I said, it's still a bet on Tippett because first of all, you're making an 8-year beyond this year, 8-year commitment to a guy where nobody's promised tomorrow.
Oh, absolutely not.
So anything could change the course of this and turn it into it's not a good deal because you're stuck. Like, obviously. You hope not. And like the greater bet than like something like that happening is just if he doesn't pan out to be what they think they see now. Like, you're betting on he can be a perennial 30-goal scorer, keep increasing production to a level that fits the mold of probably what Travis Konechny has been, because that's roughly what you're going to be paying him to be. Like, let's be clear, you're not paying Owen Tippett $6.2 million a year or having a cap hit of $6.2 million a year for him to be a top line guy. That's not what top liners are making. Top liners are now making $9-10 million.
Right. 8 at the bare minimum if you get them on a good deal.
Right. Like, actually, believe it or not, at this given point in time, you could theoretically, if you wanted to consider Tippett a top line talent production wise right now on this team anyway, you could conceivably look at the Flyers next year on cap, with what they have on Cap Friendly and say, your top line left winger then is making $6.2 million. Your top line right winger is going to make $5.5 million, and your top line center is making $7.75 million, and all three of them would be bargains.
Absolutely.
If they produce to that level. Now, I guess the counterpoint goes back to the whole conversation we had about the last week of play, which is, they're not Kucherov. They're not McDavid. No, they're not McKinnon. And that's why those guys make $12.5 million.
Well, sure. And I think as the team rebuilds around those players, I think you would eventually like that to become your second line in a lot of ways. Now, obviously, it depends on what Travis Konechny's next contract is going to look like, at a certain point. But in the meantime, if you can get... in theory, you have a top line player coming in Matvei Michkov. In theory, of course. And we've talked about the fact that Danny Briere is very likely to try. It looks like he is trying to set the team up to utilize the 3 years of Michkov's ELC to the best of his ability.
Sure.
As we sit here right now, this is a piece. You put $6 million on the books. That's great. You lock him in by the end of the contract or kind of through the duration of the contract. If Owen Tippett ends up as your second line left wing, I think you are very, very, very happy with him at that number for that term.
Well, by the way, do you know what the near lateral move is in terms of cap in this situation? Because there's only 1 year where both of them are making this level of money, and then one of them is presumably not on the team anymore.
Okay.
Cam Atkinson's making $5.875 million, and essentially after next year, maybe even after this year, depending on what you decide to do, you're swapping out Cam Atkinson at almost the same money for a player who is, instead of being 34, 24, and
That's
getting his prime years at $6.2 million.
That is a tidy piece of business out of Danny Briere.
If that's the case. And that's why I'm saying, like, that's the biggest thing. It's a good deal on potential. If he plays to the level that he looks like he could, and it ages well in that respect, then you've done great work here. And if it doesn't, it'll be a bad deal. But the track record so far tells you, like, this is what we talked about last week. You knew you were going to have to pay him. He scored 27 goals last year, and what is he at, 18 this year?
Something like that. He's
so far with a third of the season to go.
He's on pace for 30.
He's on pace for roughly 30. Exactly.
Yep.
At the very least, he's on pace to match last season.
Absolutely.
And
Even if he
twice be at
slows
20,
down a
right?
little.
And twice be at 27, which is just shy of that 30 goal mark. And really, actually, what you want to see more than anything from him over the course of the next several years of this contract isn't that the goal scoring picks up and he suddenly becomes closer to 40 than 30. It's if he rounds his game out more to also set guys up and become like if he's 30-60, you're thrilled.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I think that is
And
entirely
that's what he's got
likely.
to do it, but that he's going to have to do that with consistency. And
Yep.
that's what'll determine how good this contract is.
Well, and when you're building a team, you need a guy on your second line to have 75, 85, 90 points. Like in today's NHL, like it's not enough to just have one line for the most part. You need some amount of depth scoring. And
I don't know if I would go so far as 80, but I think that you got to break 60, maybe 65.
okay.
Yeah. Because there's teams that I see have a massive drop off from the
I think we're
top
getting to
three to
I think
the
70
next.
is really where you want your second line to be, honestly. Like you
You,
want that depth production. Like look at
well,
Vegas.
well, you know what though? I'll tell you what it is. Depends on what kind of team you are.
That's true.
If you're all offense, like you can't be the Edmonton Oilers that need to outscore teams and not have somebody else beyond the top three who score like that. You
Okay.
need 4 or 5. Like you need your power play unit to look like they're all elite players.
That's true. Toronto.
If you're a different style team, and I'm just throwing out a team, like I think New Jersey last year was like this when New Jersey made the playoffs and looked really good and things like that. They didn't have anybody who was over the top point producer, like not a ton. Jack Hughes was really good, but they didn't have a ton. They didn't have even
That's true.
but why? Because you defend differently.
That's
If
true.
your major goal beyond, hey, one guy can score a lot or two guys can score a lot is we're really good defensively. You don't need a guy on the second line to be scoring 70, 80 points a game. You just you need the differential to be his defense is good enough that it saves 5 to 10 goals the other way.
Right.
And I don't care that he doesn't add 5 to 10 more to his total and gets me to 60 points.
That's true. Okay.
That's the way that I look at it. Do you want to go to the other guy?
Yeah, I did. Ryan Poehling has also signed an extension, 2 more years after this one at 1.9 per. Little raise for Ryan Poehling. Decent little contract. We talked about the fact that he is a really quality bottom 6 / 4th line guy in today's NHL. He kills penalties. He provides a little bit of value there. He's solid player. Really good bottom 6 / 4th line guy.
Right. Almost everything about this deal makes sense except for one thing. And I'll get to that. So I'll start with all the positives like you kind of just touched on. He is the perfect 4th line player.
Yeah.
Generates speed. He's been able to produce from time to time because of it. He kills penalties. To pay him $1.9 million is not outrageous in any way.
No.
We've talked about before how John Tortorella and Briere actually echoed this as well when speaking about him. But Tortorella said it a couple times. He loves how he bet on himself with this 1-year deal that he took in the offseason. So this is the reward. You've played well through half of the season. You've done everything they have asked of you. You've been able to stay in the lineup for the most part. You're being rewarded with a contract. It's not like they went out and made a decision this past offseason to sign Garnet Hathaway at 31 years old to a 1-year deal then and just extended him for 2 more years.
Right.
They gave a 24-year-old a 1-year contract. He's 25 now. That could continue to play himself into the picture of the team's future if all goes well. It's a 2-year deal while he's in his 20s. There's nothing wrong with that. The one thing I didn't like, at least today, and there's potential, and this could change, but at least today is there is potential that Poehling blocks somebody else's opportunity.
Okay.
Now, if this clears itself up with other moves down the line, then it's a different story. Like if you get to the offseason and you decide we're buying out Nick Delorier because you've kind of started to experience life without him in the lineup. You've pulled him out of the lineup a few more times lately. Maybe you start to see how other guys belong more, that you don't want your 4th line to be rough and tumble guys. You need it to be guys like Poehling, and Hathaway can skate better, and right. Guys like that. You want that, right? What if you do decide this offseason after constant years of speculation? What if you decide this offseason is the one where you move Scott Lawton?
Well, That's actually a player that I wanted to bring up.
Sure. Well, and I'll bring up like another one I was going to
Yeah.
bring up was like I just mentioned. What if you move Cam Atkinson after this year because the off
I think
season
that's
is right?
entirely likely.
Because the off season is ripe for. We've got a guy who's on a contract. He's a veteran. He's making this kind of money. You know what you're going to pay him.
He's got 1 year left.
He's got 1 year left. So if you don't want him down the line, you can move him. Like
His next contract's probably going to be a little cheaper.
sure. Maybe you decide to do that.
But
Then keeping like if something like that happens, then keeping Poehling at his age and in his role makes a lot more sense. Because Poehling in a fourth line role, by the way, isn't blocking anybody.
No.
It shouldn't be anyway. Because
Right.
we've already talked about this. Like this is why like Bobby Brink got sent down. You don't want Bobby Brink playing 6 minutes a night on the fourth line. You want him playing real minutes. So
18 minutes a night in Lehigh
Right.
Valley. Yep.
Well, in Lehigh Valley, but if you're going to bring him up to the Flyers, you don't want him playing on the fourth line with Poehling and getting 8 minutes a night. You want Poehling to play with Garnet Hathaway, with somebody even along the likes of Nick Delorier, if that's what it means, because they don't play as much, and the other 9 do. But
right. And so I mentioned Scott Laughton there. I think there's some potential that Ryan Poehling could turn into a Scott Laughton type player. Now, obviously, they're physically a little bit different. Poehling's a little faster than Scott Laughton is.
Sure.
But they play a similar style. They play with that little bit of gritty edge. They're good on puck possession. They're good killing penalties. Ryan Poehling was also a first-round pick who's blossoming a little bit later in his career. I think there's some real reason to believe that given the opportunity and given the right system, and it certainly seems like he's fitting in John Tortorella's system fairly well, he could turn into a Scott Laughton type player kind of moving forward. And I think that would end up being fantastic found money.
Well, you're saying it also because of the fact that when necessary, they've tried to move him up in the lineup and he's worked out on occasion.
Hit and miss. Yeah.
Right. But so is Laughton, though. Like you don't want Laughton playing on your second line. Like Laughton's fit for your bottom six. And
no, when I talked earlier about filling out the team and how Tippett, ideally kind of ends up on your second line, Scott Laughton's in your bottom six of that team, certainly.
Scott Laughton's on your fourth line playing left wing at that point, if that's the way you want to go with it.
I don't disagree.
And to be fair, like Laughton hasn't had a good stretch lately. Like I don't know if you saw it, like, and I think I put this out on social.
A lot of penalties.
Just in the last 2 games, he's taken 5 penalties.
Yeah.
That can't happen. And Tortorella's talked about not having that happen. So that's scary to think about.
That feels like the sort of thing, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier. It feels like the sort of thing where you're playing with some other thoughts in your head.
Oh, even beyond that, like it's just one of these things where it's like, when you start to take more penalties when you're tired.
That's true.
Like you're getting run like this schedule in this month, and I kept calling it the gauntlet. Like if they were able to come out, like, and it was funny because ironically, when they played Dallas, and this was where I was trying to go with it, like when we talked about it back at the beginning, it was like you win 5 games in a row all of a sudden. You've got, I think they're at that point in time they had won. What was it? Because we had said they'd won 6 of 7. They had lost the first 2 coming in. So okay, even so, you had a 6-2-1 record through 9 games. You have. Because of that, you have 13 points in the standings. And I had somebody send me at the very beginning of the month, right after the Edmonton game, or maybe it was right after the Calgary game, even as January started, like, because it was like, hey, by the way, your next game is Edmonton. Have fun. You've only lost 3 or 2 in a row at that point. Your next game is Edmonton. Have fun with that.
Man, Edmonton's crazy.
I know. I will throw something out about Edmonton in a second that
they just added Corey Perry. Oh
yeah, I know. Well, I'll throw something out.
They have Evander Kane and Corey Perry. Are you kidding me? Do you want to play them in the playoffs? Holy crow!
There were a few jokes going around on social about,
I'm sure
about the type of players that they've added. I'm not talking about this. I'm not talking stylistically.
Yeah.
Especially with the other news we talked about.
I knew where you were going.
I'm sure you saw that this just in. Edmonton acquires jokes.
Yep.
All week.
Yep.
Anyway, back to what I was trying to get. So but at that point, I had somebody send me like beginning of the month that if they could get through, because we said it was 14 games in 26 days, basically.
Yep.
If they could get through that with 18 to 20 points, it would be ideal.
Okay.
Right. And they got to the Dallas game and had 5 games to go and we're at 13. And you're literally saying, that's why I said you could go over those 5 games. You could go 2-2-1 and get there.
Yep. 2
wins out of the 5, 1 game to overtime, and you're okay. And I kind of looked at Ottawa and Detroit as the ones that, like, hey, listen, if you
Those are
just
the
win those,
targeted
get
wins.
fight in one of those games against one of those top teams and get a point, and you got to 18, and you're probably sitting pretty.
Supremely doable. Yeah.
And instead they got nothing.
0-5. All right.
Rough. But yeah, so that was the deal.
Speaking
That was the deal with that. What was the thing?
speaking of
Real quick with
go
the
ahead.
Edmonton thing,
Yeah.
because all everybody talked about, and I've seen both of them firsthand in the past week, roughly, to see McKinnon and Kucherov do what they're doing, and everybody talks about them for the Hart and all that stuff like that, and look at the point production, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm telling you right now, watch Connor McDavid over the next
know.
stretch. No. I would not be surprised. Like, you don't look at him initially and think, oh, he's in this race. He's in this race.
He's in this race. He's putting up
Just
like four points a night. Like he's doing Gretzky stuff.
like Saturday night, for example, when they go into the break and they win their 16th in a row, he factors into every goal again, just like he did against the Flyers.
He's silly. It's silly how good he is.
I think somebody, I had seen a tweet somewhere along the lines of that over the course of it, Kucherov had put up something like some ridiculous number that would, over 5 games or something like that. And somehow or other, McKinnon had 5 more points.
Yeah.
Somehow in there and gained ground despite that kind of number or whatever. And then you go and have somebody ask you, oh, by the way, go look at what McDavid's done.
Yep.
Like, it's just
silly.
Stupid. It's straight up stupid what those 3 can do. So, yeah, like,
okay. It really is silly. And we are definitely watching one of the greatest players of all time. Like, I have no doubt about it.
I just wanted to even grab, like, and this doesn't even sound impressive when you think about it, but just because he's got 7 points over the last 2 games, he's got 9 over the last 5, though.
Right.
So it doesn't sound as impressive, but he's just consistently putting up 1 point a night, with the exception of like 1 game in there since getting 5 against the Flyers.
Yep.
Like, it's a point here, point here, point here. Okay. And then all of a sudden now in the last couple, it's here he comes, 7 points, 2 games.
Yeah. Certainly one of the greatest players of all time. And speaking of some of the greatest players of all time, Kevin, you had the chance to pal around with some absolute legends on Friday.
This was fun.
We saw we got some pictures from down at ice level, basically on the bench. Man, Kevin, it seems like you had a pretty fun Friday. Got to hang out with the Flyers and indirectly the Bruins alumni teams.
Yeah, didn't really talk much with the Bruins alumni or anything like that, but definitely.
How was the day?
It was a blast. It was just an absolute blast. You guys really liked when I put into the group chat the picture that I sent of the did I tell you guys that was the reason why the alumni team picture was delayed?
No, that's really funny.
Because they were waiting for the group, right, of Dan Hilferty, Keith Jones, and Danny Briere, and they all 3 of them were like, Brad Marsh had to have come over to the bench 3 or 4 times during the course of this and like been like, are they on their way? Because the guys are getting antsy out here. Like they were done with the skate part. They wanted to just go hang out. And that was, that was the end of that. Right. So we were waiting and Hilferty comes through and Jonesy comes through, and you're still waiting on Danny. And like you're checking, like, as we're checking our phones and finding out like, oh, and Tippett's getting an extension. And later on, we found out Poehling was getting one too. And it's like,
he's a busy man.
Right. So I even, like, I'm looking at it now. I even texted you guys the man with the plan, and whatever you especially liked that it was a live photo, so you could see the handshake that he was giving to somebody.
Danny, if you ever see this clip, I just want to congratulate you on some excellent handshake form, sir. It was a good one. All right.
It must just be a hockey thing. So anyway, so that's the part with that group, by the way, because this, by the way, this is what Danny Briere was talking about when he did a press conference later on in the evening, and it's like, hey guys, I keep seeing you, like, we meet again. I guess that's my fault though,
that's
like,
funny.
or whatever. Like he knows, like he
knows he's been active.
Well, and for what it's worth, by the way, and this is before, like, I know I'm still talking about the morning skate stuff with the alumni game and kind of all this fun stuff that I was experiencing. But I will say they put Dan Hilferty, Jonesy, and Danny on the bench for the first period as honorary coaches of the Flyers alumni team.
Nice.
And they introduced them as part of the pregame.
Okay.
The building loves them, some Jonesy and Danny. And like Hilferty to an extent, but like Dan Hilferty is who he is. He's the ownership representation. There's an appreciation, but like people aren't going nuts, right? No, they put Jonesy on the board and they put Danny on the board, and the place erupted.
Oh yeah.
Like these are our two guys. We're behind you 1,000%. Let's go forward. You know what I mean? Either way, by the way, here's a footnote that I know you'll appreciate because I know you'll know where I'm going when I bring this up. So the Alumni had the Flyers main locker room. You know, just something.
Yeah,
that's a bit of an important detail when you consider some recent history.
Yeah,
they had the brand new main locker room that looks great.
Ron Hextall in shambles.
It might as well, when you go in there, by the way, after like a morning skate like that for a enjoyable night that they're gonna have, it might as well have been a reception. It's just it's just banter and conversation and joking around.
I thought
like
you were gonna say open coolers of beer.
That was post game.
Okay, yeah. Fair enough.
It was, and look, because it was a celebration for Mark Recchi, who, by the way, for morning skate, Recchi wasn't there yet because obviously he's got a job. To be honest,
he's busy.
He's an assistant coach with the Columbus Blue Jackets, so he was kind of coming in from the previous night, I assume.
Right.
So he was not there for the morning skate at that point. It was also a celebration of the 1974 Stanley Cup team, of which, by the way, I believe that maybe only 3 or 4 living members of the team were not able to be there. Everybody else was.
It was
wild.
The
whole team is there.
I watched the pregame ceremony as I could, and
and for what it's worth, by the way, they're going to go take this picture, and I'm just standing in the tunnel as literally they're paraded past to go on the ice to take this picture, and it's like,
holy smokes! Look at these names.
Well, beyond the obvious that we're used to seeing, like it's not like I'm not really super starstruck by Bernie or Clarkey or anything like that.
The guys who are around all
I've
the time.
seen them.
You've seen Bill Barber 100 times, right?
Pretty much. But as you're watching, is like guys who don't come in very often.
Yeah, I feel like Dave Schultz doesn't come out very often.
He hasn't lately. He looks great.
He
Though.
looks so good. Come on, Schultz.
Do you know who was there? Who I think still looks pretty good, all things considered too. Dorney was there. Gary Dornhofer was there, and we haven't seen him in a little while.
Yeah, it was cool. Nice seeing him.
So guys like that. So yeah, it was great, and so covering the game itself, obviously, and doing all that type of stuff. By this point, Mark Recchi gets in. Mark Recchi scored 2 goals and had an assist in the game, which I'm sure there was a little bit of intention there to allow, but he still has the he very much still has the shot that he had when he was an active player.
I'm so curious. I gotta ask some Columbus Blue Jackets how hard Recchi's been trying in practice the last 2 or 3
That would be
weeks.
pretty good. I have to go and I'm gonna check
because he's been gunning it to get himself in some game shape.
I'm gonna kind of check to see the tribute video that they showed again really quick, because I'm pretty sure in the video he scores a goal. It's against Carolina in the video clips.
Okay.
He scores a goal on a breakaway that was almost a carbon copy of what he pulled in the Alumni game, which was really cool to see, because you're like,
nice.
Because you're like, he still got it. Like genuinely for a second, I was thinking about this kind of after the fact. It's 2024. You don't think like for a second, like how much time has passed since he actually retired as a player after the 2011 Boston Bruins Cup run. It's been 13
almost 15 years. Yeah.
Like you don't think that. And yet
he looks great.
He looks great, and he looked, and he was having a blast, and that was awesome to see. Yeah, like it was just awesome to see. It was so cool. And on top of like ultimately, like we talked about a little bit, there was a couple things that kind of changed about the initial roster. Obviously he was supposed to play on the crazy eights line again. Brett Fedek was not able to come in because he had torn his rotator cuff.
Right.
Unfortunately. Robert Esch was going to be in goal. Robert Esch had I think they said a lower body injury. So he was not able to play. They got a pretty good backup for Brian Boucher there. Michael Layton came. Michael Layton, by the way, is in outstanding shape.
I mean, yeah, dude.
And I know he just retired relatively recently.
I was going to say, I feel like if an AHL team called him, he'd be relatively available.
Well, I mean, in fairness, Bush is in really good shape too. All things considered. By the way, Robert Esch stepped in and was an assistant coach for the game instead. By the way, so in the picture that I sent you of Danny Briere from the bench, Robert Esch is standing right next to him pretty much. If I don't know
How's
if you
the
picked
height
up on
difference?
right. Well, I don't know if you picked up on that. That's who that was.
Right.
That's who's standing next to him.
Yeah.
When they saw each other, because I guess they haven't seen each other maybe for a little bit. Robert Esch
Big
literally,
smiles.
Robert Esch hugged him and literally picked him up off the ground.
Oh, that's so funny.
Got hang time on that one. That's
Oh,
so
that's
there
so
you go
funny.
there. I for what it's worth, by the way, because the goaltending was pretty sharp in the alumni game, all things considered.
Yeah.
Like both goalies played well. I did see Bush on Saturday afternoon prior to the actual Flyers Bruins game. And naturally
Was he walking a little
well,
gingerly?
he was walking fine. He said he was sore, but naturally I had to ask him how you feeling, like
Yeah, how are the hips? How are the knees?
There were two. I didn't get to see the other guy that I wanted to see the day after. Because Bush was one, and I wanted to see Fridge afterwards to see again how you feeling.
Right.
Because Fridge is a character, man. I mean, like he's just a ton of fun. He was trying like hell to score a goal. He wanted one badly. Now, amongst all of that, because obviously, look, Mark Recchi scoring 2 goals in an alumni game the day before he goes into the Flyers Hall of Fame, super cool, right?
Yeah.
Mike Richards scored a shorthanded goal. That was sick.
Sick.
There's not going to be the coolest one for me on the night, though. Recchi's having a night, and he technically gets an assist on this, but springing John LeClair on a rush and then the setup for Eric Lindros to watch part of the league. For me to be in the box and say that I was up there for that, to watch the dynamic duo connect one more time. So cool. I mean, that's everything. And you know this because we talked about this enough. That's everything I grew up on. You grew up on it. Like, and we even got a Donald Brashear goal.
Yeah.
Assisted by Mark Howe. There's a combination I'm sure you weren't expecting.
And you know what? I think that is a great place to kind of.
Well, I have a couple more things to say about this before we wrap up.
Okay, yeah.
Because this was a couple things. Patrick Sharp scored, by the way. Also, shocker, by the way. He's in great shape, still skating smooth as anything. He looks like he could still play. So with that setup,
it's not fair how handsome that man is.
I hear you. Well, this is where I'm
garbage.
This is where I'm getting with a couple of things with this, because obviously, okay, like that set the stage for the ceremony the next day. One of the things that I did afterwards, because like I said, it was an open locker room after morning skate on Friday, so we're bouncing around talking to people and things like that. And you chatted a little bit with people, but for the most part, I went around just trying to get some stuff. And I was going to do a story on Recchi for Saturday or whatever ahead of the game and the ceremony and all that stuff like that. And it evolved to something that I really could theme around a specific topic, because I talked to several of his past teammates, guys that would have played with Recchi when he was playing here. And everybody said the same thing. And I like, if you go and read the article, it's up on everywhere you can find me, 97.3, ESPN.com and sportstalkphilly.com. Jonesy, John LeClair, Patrick Sharp, Todd Fedoruk, everybody talked about what kind of leader he was. And I was happy to grab a few of those guys and get in questions about what kind of player was it, like what was it like being this guy's teammate, because you played with him and things like that. I'll save these in the memory bank for later, maybe during the bye week, to be honest. Because while I had John LeClair and Patrick Sharp, I also asked kind of what it's like watching the reaction to this year's team a little bit, because they're upstairs pretty frequently.
Yeah.
And got some good stuff from them on that respect as well. I hear you about Patrick Sharp. It is not fair.
It's not fair, Patrick.
By the way, do you know how Patrick Sharp's not really skating much these days on ice? Apparently he's blading a lot.
Okay.
Interestingly enough. Just it was an interesting tidbit, kind of
ball hockey comeback.
By the way, he also, because while I was doing the interview, we're part of it anyway, because we were kind of semi-scrumming. There wasn't tons of people at the morning skates. It wasn't like the typical. Jackie Spiegel, who's working for the Inquirer, was next to me doing part of an interview with Sharp at the time, and I was there, so I was getting all of this. Obviously, like I'm there to get the audio of this, but she was asking a lot of questions about kind of going around asking guys about the gear that they were using, because these are alums. They're not necessarily using the most top of the line gear that the active NHLers are or whatever.
Any Joker buckets?
What's that? No, I didn't see anything quite like that. Actually, funny enough, by the way, Sharpie had said something along the lines of that he had to edit the helmet a little bit, because he had to peel the Chicago Blackhawks stickers off of the helmet and get Flyers stickers done for his helmet.
Did Mark Howe bring the Cooperalls?
No, Mark Howe did not bring the Cooperalls, but But he was out there. Oh, by the way, a footnote from the game also, by the way, that you have to throw in. Joe Watson at 80 years old,
So cool.
making an entrance and then finding. Well, the whole thing was cool, though, because the ceremony beforehand, by the way, if you didn't get chills, you're not human. Watching him bring the Stanley Cup out with the players who did, and a handful of them. This was really funny, too, because it was on the stream that they had for the game, too. So they take the picture. A few of them reach out, put their hands on it, that kind of thing. And then Orest Kindrachuk just goes for it and goes, no, screw this. I'm picking it up, and picks it up. And Bill Clement standing behind him and turns around and goes, pass it around. So he gets it. And he actually, because, Kindrachuk didn't fully lift it over his head kind of deal. Bill Clement did. And gives it the full lift and has it, turns to Dorney and goes, like, as if like, come on, pass it around. And Dorney goes, don't give me that thing. I can't lift it. So they did find one more taker for it, by the way. Moose DuPont picked it up too.
That's so funny.
And held it above his head too. So it was awesome. Like that kind of thing. Like it was just chilling and great and things like that. And for what it's worth, by the way, because I brought up the part where, talking to John LeClaire and Patrick Sharp about where this kind of thing is going or whatever. Mark Recchi, by the way, that day when we talked to him prior to the alumni game and then after the alumni game, had like noted that like after the game, he goes, this was fun. I still have to get the speech together. I'll see how hopefully I do okay or whatever. And, things like that. He pointed out in the speech about brought up Ed Snyder and how Ed Snyder built this on family and all that stuff like that. And this sense of family and things like that. And then said, between Dan Hilferty and Jonesy and Danny Briere and John LeClaire, Patrick Sharp, I believe also maybe threw a nod to Eric Lindros in there too. And Lindros is really, I think, just an ambassador of this or whatever, but nonetheless, it was interesting to hear him bring Lindros into that picture. And Torts on the bench, obviously, all that type of stuff like that. He goes, if there's one thing they're doing right, it's that they're definitely bringing family back. Mr. Snyder would be proud of what they're working on, that kind of thing. And that's a guy who doesn't have to say those things to an extent. Like, yes, he just had a great weekend. Don't get me wrong, but he's working for another team.
Sure.
Like he's seeing it too. And that's one of the most encouraging things to come out of this 50 games into this season, this first year that they're rebuilding, is that it's going somewhere positive. They're building something pretty successful here. And, and like we talked about with his leadership too, like it's fair to say that, when you go to play for as many different franchises you did, you lead 3 of them to Stanley Cups or help get Stanley Cups with 3 teams, that you're definitely a leader in some way. And he came close in Philly too, things like that. So
yeah, that's something every player can say.
Yeah. What a fun weekend though. I mean, just what a fun weekend for that. And it's kind of a shame that the game afterwards was kind of a dud. Just because it was, and it's a shame to say, because like we talked about it last week when they played Ottawa, that Tortorella immediately kind of came out and was like, this was a clunker, definitely disqualified. Well, so was Detroit and so was Boston, kind of. It's like, and Boston wasn't even that bad. It was just, it turns into a clunker quickly when you're down 4-0 before you can blink.
Man. Yep.
That's the thing. So it turns into a clunker in that respect. So it's like, that's the unfortunate part, but the vibes were really cool after that weekend, and the feeling around it and things like that. It's cool. Next time they have one of our, Boost joked on Saturday that the next time we'll see him play is the next time there's an alumni game. So
that makes a lot of sense.
The next time there's an alumni game, I'll definitely probably be trying to tag along and just be around for it, because it was a lot of fun. And and the fact of the matter is that, from my perspective, people, they see you there, like they see you around and being among the group or whatever. And by the time the night was over, you had the group of the guys from the 74 team, obviously, that were there. You had all these players playing in the game. Coatsy was on the bench doing interviews. They grabbed, a guy who maybe literally this wasn't possible probably, a few weeks ago. They grabbed as their alumni head coach. They grabbed Craig Berube and said, "You coach the team."
Pretty nice,
because he's not doing anything else, right? I mean, he's been in town a lot lately. He's scouting for the Blues, doing this, obviously, but nonetheless, he was around. Hey, come be the coach and whatever and things like that. So it was just really cool. It was just really cool to see all those guys around and popping in and out and things like that. Ironically, the final score of the game was in reverse the next day, ironically.
Fun and exciting.
And
I wish it had gone the other way.
And it wasn't, like the Boston side wasn't the most daunting of alumni teams they could have thrown together. Like,
Yeah,
to
but
be
when
honest,
you have Ray Bork on the ice, it's still pretty special.
Ray Bork was cool to see Bork on the ice, and like it was definitely cool. There was some thought about whether or not Bergeron was going to play or Chara was going to play. Like, to be honest, I was surprised that the only member, because they have a few other guys.
Bergeron's too busy training to come back. Don't worry about it.
Well, he says he's not, but I hear you. But like they have a few guys that are listed on their alumni website that play in these games with some regularity, I guess. Like Chara definitely does. Tuukka Rask has played on occasion.
Yep.
Adam McQuaid was on, I think, that 11 team, like things like that. Like the only player from the 11 team that I can remember who actually suited up in this game was Chris Kelly.
Okay.
Which I thought was just interesting because the fact that I thought that maybe a few more of them, even if Bergeron's not interested in doing, because Bergeron's not listed.
I think for a lot of those guys, maybe not quite enough time has passed since their hockey careers. Like they're still.
Well, no, I would have thought that they might have come down because of Recchi and because it was a night for him. Like that, he was on that team. He retired after that cup run.
Right.
That maybe there's something to that. No, I guess not. And I'm sure travel has to do with it too. Like usually, if you're playing a bunch of alumni games in the Boston area and then you get to this, it's different. Like you have to come to Philly for this. It's a little different.
A whole different animal.
Sure. So yeah, but it was what it was. It was what it was. It was a fun time. He does still have Recchi still did have a few teammates, I guess, who were on the current team. Like Marchand obviously was a teammate of his and things like that. So I'm sure that Marchand is the mastermind behind, hey, everybody, we're going to the bench to watch the ceremony. Like,
absolutely.
Come out and watch. So both teams watched from the bench, which was cool too.
That seems like his kind of thing. But yeah, it seemed like it was a really fun weekend. And
so after all that, we get a break.
Yeah, good little spot celebrating the past. As we look ahead, the future looks bright. Mark Recchi talked about it a little bit. The next kind of NHL event that the Flyers care about is the All-Star break. That'll be over this next weekend. We'll talk about that on next week's show. We will also have a little bit more of a kind of a look forward during next week's show. But until then, make sure to follow us on social media. We're at YWT. Sorry about that. We are at YWT Podcast pretty much everywhere. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso. Subscribe to our YouTube page. Follow us everywhere you follow your podcasts. Make sure to find us on sportstalkphilly.com as well. Like I said, we'll be back next week with a look ahead towards those last 32 games. The All-Star break will be over, and we'll be right back to it. So until then, the grind is on. We'll see you.